Hello, my name is Father Frank Almade. I'm the pastor of St. Joseph the Worker Parish in the eastern suburbs of Allegheny County in the Diocese of Pittsburgh. This presentation is part of a series of town hall meetings that I led over the last several weeks in our parish, in all of our 8 churches. The purpose of this is to look around and to look forward as we are in our 3rd year as a new merged parish, how we might move forward and the changes that might be necessary for us to carry that out. What I'd like to do is give a little bit of an overview of On Mission for the Church Alive, and then be more specific about how it impacts our parish. Going back about 5 years, Bishop Zubik, after the very successful completion of our campaign for the Church Alive, the Diocese of Pittsburgh's capital campaign many years ago, the bishop recognized that numbers of faithful, numbers of priests, numbers of ministers had been declining in the Diocese of Pittsburgh. In this regard, we are probably not any different than many of the dioceses in the Midwest and the Northeast of our country. But we needed also to look at that from a perspective of how we might be able to be, as he says, a church alive. Part of that is structural. And so On Mission for the Church Alive has been focusing on making sure that every single one of our parishes is able to provide for the needs of the people and have enough resources, financial resources, building resources, and most of all, human resources to carry out a lively carrying out of ministry in our parishes. An example. 20 years ago in the year 2000 or thereabouts, for our October count, there were approximately 850,000 Catholics, at least on the books of all of our parishes, approximately 185 or so parishes. And we had probably in excess of over 200 active priests. Over time, however, those numbers have gone down. In the last year, 2021, our number of Catholics on the books is probably 450,000, a tremendous drop. And the number of priests is probably in the neighborhood of 150 or 160. And our actuarial tables for our priests expect that over the next several years there will be continued retirements from the large ordination classes of the late 1960s and the 1970s, and that we will probably level off at about 110 or 120 priests, active priests. How can 110 priests minister to 185 parishes? Probably can't be done. So over the last several years, through a process of consultation at both the local level and the diocesan level, our diocese has structurally re-looked at all of our parishes. At this time now, nearing the end of 2022, we have 63 parishes in the Diocese of Pittsburgh. Another 10 are on target next summer to be merged probably into 4 parishes. And so by the end of On Mission for the Church Alive, next July, we will have 67 parishes. And again, the purpose of this is not just for rearranging our structure, but to make sure that all parishes have an adequate and, in fact, a good amount of energy, finances, and resources to carry out their work. In this regard, then, our parish is not any different. We were formed, the 8 great churches of the East, 7 parishes, 8 churches, on July 1st, 2020. And so we're into our 3rd year. During that time, however, we recognize that one of the characteristics of St. Joseph the Worker Parish is that we are an older community. In fact, I learned over the last couple of months that our parish is leading the diocese in the number of funerals, masses, and blessing services, more than any other parish. Over the last 12 months, we've buried 291 people, and that has continued, over the previous couple of years. We are, that is by comparison, against the number of baptisms, probably 50 or 55. And the number of people that we have on our registration has declined as well, from around 9,500 to maybe 9,100. We continue to slide down, even as some people, some families, are joining our parish. And so as we move into the third year of our existence, I have been making this presentation at 8 town hall meetings in all of our churches over the last several weeks to present these statistics to our parishioners, and also to ask how we might become that lively, energized, and evangelizing parish that the bishop desires for every parish in the Diocese of Pittsburgh. Now, the bishop is also engaged a company out of Philadelphia, Catholic Leadership Institute, to assist these parishes, many of our parishes, to move from their structural changes into evangelization. I have to admit, though, we're a little bit ahead of the game, and that 2 years ago, I was approached by a group of people called Step Forward, a group of very energized and thoughtful people associated with St. Vincent Seminary in Latrobe, who do planning for parishes. And over a 17-month period after our coming together, we put together a plan for our future. It may come up on our screen that this plan for our parish, excuse me, a vision statement, a series of strategy pillars, and then 6 areas in which we want to focus on how we might become a very lively parish. And even though it's not on the sheet that you may see or will be available on our website, we also have many to-dos underneath those 6 areas of concern. Some of them we've actually carried out over the last couple of years, but many of them we are not. And this is part of our element, to try to be as lively and energized, reaching out to the people in our community. That's where we are right now. I also recognize not only the slowly declining numbers of parishioners, but also how our priest situation in our parish has happened. We were blessed for a number of years to have a resident priest from Ghana, Father Daniel, who was very helpful to us. He was a student at Duquesne University in theology, pursuing his doctorate. And over the last couple of weeks, he completed his studies after several years, and he has now moved on to a new ministry in another part of our country. We lost him. He was very helpful to us. And another priest that we were blessed with, Father Cassian Edwards, a Benedictine priest, again from St. Vincent's Monastery, Archabbey in Latrobe, has been helping us on a part-time basis. He came to us 18 months ago as he was assigned to graduate studies, but also that he would help out in a parish. And we are very blessed to have him. But we recognize that he will be leaving us probably early in the spring of 2023. That will leave us with only 3 priests, Father Ken, Father Martin, and myself. And I have to admit, we're not spring chickens. We probably are more characteristic of the age of many of our priests in the Diocese of Pittsburgh. Father Ken is 62, Father Martin is 71, and I'm 69. And so each of us has to be aware of what we can do and maybe what we cannot do as well. And we also recognize as well declining numbers of people who are attending Mass on a regular basis in our 8 churches. When we began 2.5 years ago, I made the determination, confirmed by our parish council, that we would use all 8 of our churches, and that's what we're doing right now. Our Sunday Mass schedule has 9 Masses in 8 churches. St. Coleman in Turtle Creek has 2 Masses because of their Sunday night Mass. And as you'll see in the sheet that might be provided on the screen, our October count has approximately 1,466 people. This is not. This is partially a result of the pandemic. Many people have chosen to stay home, watch Mass, and pray with us by way of live streaming in several of our churches. And some have decided that that's probably more what they like to do. We probably have gone down over the last several years in the number of active members. When you compare that number, 1,466, in all 9 of the Masses in 8 churches, it compares to the total number of seats in those 8 churches, probably in the neighborhood of 4,000. That means there's a lot of empty spaces in our churches whenever our priests celebrate Mass. And as I've been trying to point out to our parishioners, it's not just enough that you open the doors of the church and the priest shows up. For a really and truly vibrant Eucharistic liturgy, it is necessary that many people assist: Eucharistic ministers, a lector or 2, ushers to assist our parishioners. We need sacristans. We need those who help in the music ministry, both musicians, a cantor for some Masses, and maybe an occasional choir as well. All of these, almost all of them, are volunteers. And we're having a little bit of a difficulty making sure we have enough volunteers for all of our Masses. In that regard, too, we recognize that these ministers, well-trained and really devoted to the Mass, can get worn out if we use them too often. We've reached out and continue to reach out, and I do this again, to welcome people who might want to serve in one or another of our liturgical ministries. However, we haven't had a whole lot of takers. All this brings to mind that I believe we need to look ahead at reducing the number of Masses on the weekend and the number of churches that we will use. After consultation with the Pastoral Council, Finance Council, and our clergy team, I am suggesting that we move from 9 Masses on a Sunday, Saturday night Sunday, to 6, and that we move from having all 8 of our churches in use to only 4. And the purpose of this are twofold. First of all, so that we can have the most lively and energized liturgies with all those ministers who are well-trained and devoted to the carrying out of their various ministries. But also that the people themselves, when they come, have a sense of being part of something bigger, something alive, something really energized. Now, at this point, it is important for me to recognize that, and I hesitate to use this phrase, closing churches has two different meanings at this time in the Catholic Church. Please forgive me for being a little bit technical here. One of them is the closing of a church using the church's canon law, what is called canonical relegation. In this process, which demands many hours of consultation with our parishioners, our regional vicar, and the bishop and his advisors, we need to look at that process, looks at the possibility of permanently closing a church building. In this regard, the church takes very seriously that all of our churches are not just piles of bricks, forgive me for using an awkward phrase, but they are consecrated places of prayer. And that even as our ancestors prepared those churches and decorated them, stained glass windows, decorated with statues, many different images of saints for our best use as worship, that in fact to close and permanently close for either selling to a secular agency or to tear down is a very serious thing. And that the only reason that the Vatican would look at that is that if it prevents the parish from actually carrying out its ministries. In this regard, good news and bad news. To do canonical relegation, almost all the parishes need to be in deficit spending and having great difficulty with their finances. I have to say, and we've been public about this, that at St. Joseph the Worker, because of our generosity of our previous parishes and a number of bequests that have come in over the last couple of years, we have savings in the bank. We are not able to do a canonical relegation. And that's where the second kind of closing, what I'm calling a soft closing. In other words, that we would use, I'm suggesting, 4 of our church buildings on a regular basis for both Sunday worship and weekday worship. And the other 4 would be available on an occasional basis, but not regular basis, for a baptism, a wedding, or a funeral at the request of our parishioners. They would still be available for the use of our parishioners. And that's where we are looking at right now. Why do we do this? Partially, it is not about money. It is really about offering the opportunity to have the most lively, engaged, and prayerful liturgies on weekdays, and especially on the Lord's Day, and that we use all of our ministers to their best advantage. In this regard, then, I think our parishioners understand that moving to only 4 churches is a way of us acknowledging declining numbers of people, declining numbers of priests, and yet not giving in to despair about that, but rather wanting to carry out evangelization and ministries. In this regard, a number of people have asked a very sensible question. What criteria would we use in the closing of churches, soft closing? And in a third option that may be on your screen, we have a geography of what is called a congregant plot. Some of you may know that all of our parishes, both past and the more recent carrying out of mergers through On Mission for the Church Alive, are territorial. We have boundaries. And you can see on the map the boundaries and the little dots where our households are. Ours is not a large parish geographically, and you can see the 8 different church buildings, whether in Swissvale, all the way over in Wilmerding, Turtle Creek, Forest Hills, Churchill, Braddock Hills, and Braddock. And you can see that they're not that far from each other. That would be one consideration of geography. How might we make sure that our parishioners have the opportunity of attending a church near to them. I've also, in the general way, acknowledging a bigger church is probably better than a smaller one. More parking is better than less. Less repair is better than more. And the recognition of that geography so that we provide for everybody within the geographic boundaries of our parish. You may also note, however, that not everybody who are registered as St. Joseph the Worker parishioners live within the boundaries. We have a number of people on our neighboring parishes and even some far afield as well. We appreciate and are glad for all who are members of our parish, but we also have to recognize that we carry out our ministry within the area that the bishop has defined as St. Joseph the Worker Parish, the many different boroughs and townships in this, the eastern neighborhoods and communities of Allegheny County. Here is where we look to the future. Some may ask, well, are you going to do this soon? I'm looking over the next 6 to 8 months of continuing this discussion with our parishioners. First of all, that we might validate my suggestions for moving from 9 masses to 6, from using 8 churches on a regular basis to only 4. And I welcome the suggestions of our parishioners and our neighbors, those who come to us, to suggest, is this the right number? And which of those churches should we use? After the first of the year, after Christmas, I will engage our parishioners, beginning with our councils and then using the bulletin as an instrument to propose several different schedules for a Mass schedule for the weekend. And maybe not quite in a voting pattern, but asking people what would be the best way for us to schedule those for our 3 priests that will carry out the bulk of celebrating the liturgy on Sunday. And that we would move from 2 masses on a weekday to 1, given the many, many funeral masses that our parish conducts throughout the year. And then secondly, that we would also look at which churches we think might be the best ones that we might focus on for regular worship. In that regard, I welcome your suggestions. Email me, drop me a note, put it in the basket, and I ask you, if you suggest a church or churches for those purposes, give a couple of sentences of why. Criteria and reasons for why we do these things are important. The timing that I am suggesting has to do with Father Cashin's leaving us probably the end of the spring academic semester, probably sometime during the season of Easter in late April or in May. It's a soft date. We need to use our consultation locally in our parish and then work with our regional vicar and the bishop and his advisors in the carrying out of these decisions, so that this is not going to be sprung on people, but rather an opportunity for us to say, how might we implement our step forward planning process? How might we welcome and be as welcoming as possible to all people who want to join our parish in one fashion or another, and that we might truly, through our liturgies and our ministries, carry out an active and vital parish. I thank you for listening to me. I welcome your suggestions and opportunities for numbers of masses, which churches might be valuable, and any other ideas that you might have, so that St. Joseph the Worker is the most hospitable and evangelizing parish in the Diocese of Pittsburgh.